because on the one hand, she works in the field of philosophy of education, which, as I understand, empirical studies and research grounds are somehow not necessary. But on the other hand, Liz is very successful in winning grants. So, Liz, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Will, and thank you to all of you for coming to this session today. As my colleague Will has said, the session is about getting grants. Why do we want them? Do we want them? Maybe we don't want them. And assuming we do want them, how do we get them? So I will just share my screen now with you. So this presentation is, it's a funny time to give this presentation, right? Because let's address a few of the elephants in the room. So one of the elephants in the room is those of us who are teaching and research staff in our university. And if you're at other universities too, you might be thinking about notification of interest, NOI. I can't remember exactly what it means. It means that you're going to submit a grant this year. The other big elephant in the room is I know many of us in Hong Kong are very anxious about this lockdown situation, but there's not much we can do about it, unfortunately. So hopefully we can have an interesting time and focus on research together for an hour and a half. So on this first slide, I have this comic. I don't know if you've seen it before. Why don't we want grants? This comic gives you some idea, right? It's sort of combative situation. And this is something that we know this is a stereotype about being a researcher, which we have to grapple with. So today I'm not going to, I know that people are coming from different fields here. Some are students, some are senior faculty who probably know as much about this as I do. So I'm not going to give step by step, this is why you want it and this is how you get it, like I'm telling you what to do. This is going to be much more interactive and it's going to be philosophical because I'm a philosopher, like Will mentioned. So I'm going to zoom out and look at the big picture, zooming out from RGC, RDO, NOI, ECS, GRF, PR, CRF, and so on. And think about what is this really about for us? And the aim is going to be kind of consciousness raising. I'm actually planning to submit an NOI soon. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do for mine. So I also hope to learn something from talking to you. And I think that's part of my aim today. My orientation is going to be around the importance of aligning our professional work with our values. And I've been focused a lot on virtue ethics these days. So I do think about this connection between ourselves and society, and in this case, ourselves and the institutions we work for, and how to make that alignment while also recognizing the ways that there may be eternal conflicts and seriously competing priorities when it comes to the work that we do and the lives we want to lead and the kind of people we want to be. So I want to take a big step back and then connect the dots between who we are and why we want to get grants as people and as members of this community. So I want to start out with giving you a chance to warm up and talk to some other people. So first thing I want to do is actually hear from you. And I think this is going to be informative for the rest of our session. So what I'm going to do now is to break you up into the breakout rooms in Zoom into groups of about 4 or 5 people and give you the chance to start expressing and communicating your views about the first question that I asked: why do we want grants? And I am focused on research grants here, but there's no problem if you want to talk about teaching and learning grants or other kinds of grants as well. So I'd like you to focus on these 4 questions. why do you want to get research grants? Why don't you want to get research grants? So if you don't want to get research grants, why don't you want to? And by get, I mean applying for, preparing for, conducting the research, completing the grant. So why do you want to be involved with getting grants? Why do you not want to? And then a second part of that is, what are the benefits of getting grants to you and to other people? And on the other side, on the flip side, what are the costs to you and to other people? Because I want to start from taking a big picture look at this. So I'll give you about, I think this time I'll give you about 10 minutes to discuss, because I know this is a diverse group of people. So maybe you want to introduce yourself for a few moments before you get into these questions. So I'll put you into the breakout groups, give you about 10 minutes. So everyone should have a chance to share what they think about these questions for a few minutes. And after, I'll give you a 1 minute or 2 minute warning, bring you back together and hear a little bit about what you think are the answers to these questions before I share with you some of my answers to these questions. So now how do I do the breakout rooms? Okay, so we have 31 people. So I think we want 6, I'll make 6 groups for now. And I will open all the rooms now, and then I'll put these questions into the chat box so you can still see these questions as you're in your breakout groups. So I'll give you 10 minutes and then ask for you to report back your thoughts on these questions. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully that was not a rude interruption for you and you had enough time to discuss the main questions I was asking. So the questions I was asking are basically the pros and cons of getting grants, why you want them, why you don't. And now I'd like to hear a little bit from you. And I want to start first with, let's get the negative stuff out of the way. So I want to hear first about, why don't you want to get grants? Because maybe you came here thinking I was going to tell you why you would. So let's hear some of the reasons why you don't want to get grants or why there's costs involved. Really, I think anyone's free to chime in that wants to say something. The floor is open. You can share your own personal view or something interesting you were discussing in your group.
Liz, it's Mark here. Can I jump in first there? I think we didn't put that negatively. We just acknowledged that some people really need money in order to employ people, in order to get data, etc. And that there are some people who really don't need the money because they just need a brain, a computer, and a library, because they work in literature, because they work in mathematics, because they work in philosophy, whatever. And so they just need the time. So it's not to put it negatively, just that many of us are in situations like that, although we did acknowledge that to get the time, a grant is useful to buy ourselves out of teaching and so on. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. Other thoughts you discussed in your groups?
Didn't really discuss it. This is Dave Randall. But one of the reasons for not getting grants is that there's, in some instances, better ways to do it. That is, if you want to support innovation in universities, the grant system has its limitations in that it tends to be conventional. And other types of applications, such as going to departments or to groups of people that are collected together rather than just simple grant applications, may produce better results overall.
Great, thank you for that. Yes, I've definitely found a similar situation in my personal case, so I definitely agree with you there. Any other thoughts anyone wants to mention?
I think for the beginners, because in our group, we have 2 research students actually, and it will be good for them to try and participate as a co-investigator, just to learn how the game is played, learn the process. and maybe later on, yeah, they know that their project may end up in the wrong reviewer. I mean, they have to learn the psychology as well, in addition to the games. So it is a long road, as I told them, and then you may have to apply time and again before you gain some success or some luck. So to participate first is important. Yeah.
Definitely. So that was very balanced perspective on it. But on the negative side, you did mention is requires something psychological, maybe. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, well, here are some of the other things you need to keep in mind. So I do have more to say about the positives than the negatives, because I do want to encourage you to apply for grants, but I think it is worth coming to grips with the challenges as we go forward, and not just assuming it's all good stuff, because like a lot of good things, it takes hard work too. So here are some of the reasons that I thought of why we wouldn't want grants. So there's a time commitment. And as we know in academia, often to do something well, it takes some time. And that's especially the case when you're doing something new to you. So maybe if you have, the first few papers you write, it takes a long time to write them. Same thing with grants. So there's a learning curve, and it does take some time. And for some researchers, like Mark mentioned, like Dave mentioned, it's not always the most effective way to do your research, right? So some people will say the time that I spend writing a grant could be time I would spend writing an article or conducting research that does not require grants to conduct the research, such as theoretical or primary research. It can divert from some of your research agenda. And I think what Dave Randall said is also connected to this. So you might have a basic agenda, or you might want to do what we might call blue sky research, which is something more open, and you don't know what you're going to find, or it might take a lot of time. And there's sort of this traditional view of science and research as something that takes time. There's not always a finding. There's not always an output that's immediate. And that's kind of underpinning some of our ideas about getting tenure and things like this. So the problem is that grant-based research, they generally do want some outcomes. They generally do want some results. They're not going to give you money to say, I did a lot of interesting things that didn't go anywhere productive. That's not the style of grant research. So not all research yields results. Innovative research might also not be fundable through grants because of this challenge. So this is also helpful to think through what grants are for, right? So some good research needs time rather than money. So that's one of the big challenges. So cost to self, I think we can think more practically for those of us who've done a lot of grant writing. So it takes time, and anything that cuts into your time takes away from your relaxation, having a relaxed life. Maybe you have other self-development plans, and it's very hard to do everything. And if you're going to apply for grants effectively, that's going to take some time away for some other things. Freedom from an agenda. So we have, it's very good that we have a process that involves multiple steps to apply for the big grants. That's helpful, but that means that you need to keep those timelines in mind, and you're not free to do whatever you like. Cost to self, another way to think about it, it can be stressful. It can be time consuming. Williamson mentioned some psychological costs. So it can be embarrassing. It can be embarrassing to do something that you're not quite sure what you're doing, to the idea that you're going to do research that you don't really know what it's about, and learning that skill of communicating about that. And the peer review process can also be embarrassing and stressful for people. And there can be a sense when you add all this together that it threatens your own sense of your personal autonomy. Maybe you think that you have other ways to spend your time. So on a deep level, it could also be something that you see as threatening to autonomy. But let's now look at the positive side. So what are some of the good things about research grants? So why do you want research grants? And again, I want to hear from some people what you discussed in your groups. Why do you want research grants, and what are the benefits to doing research grants? So anyone can chime in?
I'll chime in.
Great.
So my research career was over 50 years. I'm now retired. I had research grants through that entire period, and it allowed me basically to do whatever I wanted. That is, I was driven by research needs, and I needed money because I was in biology, and my work was strongly demanded instruments as well as people. And I got all of that support through research grants. It also was valuable for me in that research grants make you focus on your research. You have to think it through, and you might not do it so completely without the use of a research grant to make you reconsider and put together a research program for the next few years.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's...
Anyway, I enjoyed it. I never found it personally taxing or anything. It was my life.
Wonderful, thank you. Other thoughts on other experiences and reasons why you want to get grants? Tina, what did your group discuss?
Yes. Right. Okay. Yeah. Hello. I joined 2 groups, so we discussed both the positive and the negative points, I think most of us are very positive, so we talk about, on top of personal reasons, for promotion, future career development, and we talk about we do need the resources, to conduct research, and someone like me, with a research interest in education, equity, and diversity, I really want to, contribute to that local underprivileged minority community. I want to do something for them, make their situation in education better, I think one of the members talk about, it is really time-consuming process, so it's not just for research, so in addition to research, you have the administration, you have other duties involved. As PI, you have to know how to run the whole team, work, closely with other members, throughout, the whole process. Yeah. So, and then also it's a process of you have to learn from depression, so at the end of June, it's always, sometimes I think it's happened to everybody, it happened to me several times, bad news, comes in, and it's a fail, so you have to apply again, so it's, and we struggle to, if we want to use the existing proposal, can we really address the comments, given by the reviewers, if we want to go ahead, move on, just forget it, get rid of it, and we start with a new one. But this is the whole process you have to just go through again. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Anything else interesting that came up in your group discussions, or anything that somebody else said that you learned something new thinking about?
Can I just add another point?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think research grant applications are designed for science and engineering, and that the arts faculties get a really poor response in this system. And that's because of the dominance of thinking about science these days. And I think this is very unfortunate. So that I've been fortunate to be a biologist, and so the grant system was largely designed for me. Whereas when I was in graduate studies and got involved with the English department, I found how difficult it was for them to apply in a system that was really designed for the philosophy of science. The thinking is so different in different regions of the university that to lump them all together, producing similar types of research applications as imposed by an enlarged bureaucracy is a really, I think, dangerous thing.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. And I think that's one of the collective costs. I actually had another slide saying, okay, what are the collective costs? And I think that we could say that that is a collective cost. If the system is oriented towards science, it does disadvantage those of us who aren't scientists. And it does kind of send us mixed signals about our place and what we should be doing in the institution. So it might be that in biology, doing your very best work and getting a grant absolutely go hand in hand, but it doesn't feel that way for me with my work. It often feels like to do something that can get me a conventional grant is something different from the innovation I would normally want to do. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the essential problem. In my case, I always thought of something to do and then I got a grant to do it. So I never adjusted what I wanted to do to the availability of grants. I searched a grant in order to complete what I wanted to complete. And whereas because there are strictures on the type of research grants that are available, other people with rather different views of the world have more difficulty in filling out grant applications.
Mm-hmm.
Which is re-saying what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, may I add up one more point?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Percy Kwok from EPL department. So one of the big advantages for the young researchers to co-research, pointed out by William in my group, is to publicize, our project research grant, research findings, into some international journal papers. And that will be a big, I think, a big advantage or a big chance for young researchers to work with some other big professors, as I did it before 20 years ago.
Great, thank you. So yeah, the opportunity to do a new project, and I think that that's another one of the opportunities is you being invited to think about what you want to do and to do something new. You have the potential to do a collaboration that you might not have had before, and that kind of thing. So let me go back to my slides again from current slide. So here's some of the benefits that I came up to. So these are kind of obvious or basic, or what I see as kind of surface level or superficial benefits. So we are encouraged to get grants because it sort of looks good. So the external validation, right, to keep your job and get promoted, to add to your CV and research profile. So you can see this as make your boss happy and make yourself happy. Obviously, to do research that costs money. So for some people, this is a no-brainer. Your research costs money. It costs money to hire people, costs money to gather data. And so this is about doing things that you cannot do by yourself, that you need a team to do. And also, we know that the grants are supposed to have a larger benefit. All of our research is supposed to have a larger benefit, ideally. And this is a slightly philosophical question, but I feel quite strongly that we are here to benefit society as a whole, as academics in a public institution. So the funds are to benefit research, to support research that benefits everybody. Taking a deeper view, as mentioned, it can provide structure and space for a focused research agenda. It can give you a chance to focus. Maybe you think you're having a nice time going from one project to another, but a big project is going to give you some structure and help you to really pursue something where you can make your mark on the academic community. It gives you a chance to see the link between your past work and your current and future work, and to ensure that you're developing over time towards something deeper and deeper. Through the application process, setting deadlines and agenda, all of that's keeping you on track so that you're not just thinking about teaching and just thinking about administration all day, because otherwise research can slip through the cracks. I mentioned before that it's for benefiting society, but we can think more about what this really means to make a difference, to inform the public, to make convincing recommendations. Maybe you've always felt like there's a problem. This is what drove me to educational research, was I thought that there was some problems, and I wanted to help other people to see those problems if they didn't see those problems, because I thought that's the first step to try to fix those problems. So my research still kind of plays that role. And to make a difference, maybe you've discovered a research area and you think, why is nobody doing research on this topic? Well, here's your opportunity to do research on this topic and to create a new generation of scholars who are going to do research on that topic by funding your research assistants, over time, more senior researchers and PhD students who can help you to develop the topic that you've discovered is important. So if we think about the benefits, I think there's a lot of benefits to oneself when it comes to self-development. So you will learn, when you have a grant, you will learn how to mentor others. The first time I had a grant, I received a grant, was the first time I was responsible for giving other people research training. And I hadn't had that experience before. That also sort of helps you think more deeply about your own research process. You learn how to work in a team and to delegate projects. So this is a pretty vital leadership skill that can be transferred to, you know, any domain in academia or beyond it, which is part of leading a project. Collaborating with your co-investigators, your co-authors, your international collaborators, how to do that effectively. I find, you know, people can give you tips, but each person has a different experience and you have to develop that experience yourself. You can learn about accountability, how to be accountable for your research. Obviously, you have to be organized. You have to be an effective communicator. You need to be focused in a sustained way over time and have a commitment. So all of these, I mentioned I'm quite into virtue ethics these days. So these are all kind of personal capacities that you develop as you get into the world of working with grants. When it comes to, I mentioned solving problems. So we can also think about this as, what are the problems you want to solve? And these are some of the things that I think come up with social sciences and educational research. You want to identify problems, factors, something that other people don't see that is interesting, bring a theory to light in a real world circumstance, enhance understanding about the best practice or the worst practice, increase quality of services, reduce unfairness, inequality, and injustice, and improve things. I think this is why a lot of us, especially in education and social science, come into education and then into research itself. And research grants can help you not only to do these things, but also how to communicate with diverse audiences to do these things. Because I think to do these things well, it's not enough. You know, I really like sitting by myself and writing books, but then I'm often frustrated that nobody's reading these books. So these are things that you can't do by yourself sitting in your office. You want to work with other people, learn the skills to begin to communicate your findings with the public, and being involved with grants can help you to learn those skills. But there is a challenge here. As I mentioned, there's some costs and some challenges, especially for those of us in education and social science. There are challenges, there are parts that seem unfair, but there are also the benefits. And what I want to stress here is a need for alignment between and across sort of 4 areas related to your personal sense of self and who you are in your institution and in society. So on the one hand, you have your own personal and professional agenda. I want to be the best researcher in comparative education in the world, and I want to get a job and then get tenure at my job. Then you have your vision of what your job is. You know, I will be the leader in this area, and I will contribute to the debate in this area. You have what people expect of you. And in a way, they might be the same thing. But for some people who aren't familiar with grants, this might be a bit puzzling. And then the other part is what counts as performance to the people you're working with. And does that align with your own agenda for yourself or not? So there's a need for an alignment here. And this is connected deeply to grants because you might have a vision, but it might be difficult to pursue that vision. And the reason it might be difficult to pursue that vision is because of the grant writing process. So now I want to turn to the question of how do we get grants? And I want to argue here that there is a challenge that some of us encounter between our own sense of the research. I think a few people mentioned this, the research that matters to us, the research that we think is important, and the processes that it takes to get a grant, which involve the peer review. And again, to think about some of the challenges with peer review. So I hope you've seen this image before about peer review of a journal article. So I think all of you know something about journal articles, right? So there's your manuscript as you submitted it, but then after you get your feedback, you get feedback from your department head, you get feedback from your mentor, you get feedback from 2 anonymous peer reviewers, you get feedback from another person at your institution, and everyone has a slightly different understanding of what you're doing. And you might be wondering what you're doing at the same time. You might discover through that process that you don't really know what you're doing. Now, there's a risk there. If you try to do what everyone wants you to do, you're not actually going to progress in getting the grants because you're going to design a car that doesn't actually drive, or you're going to design a car that you need those 5 people to drive for you because you can't drive it yourself. So this is where we have to think really critically about how we do the work of applying for a grant. So how do we get a grant? We have to apply, we have to think about who our peer reviewers are, and we have to think really critically and reflectively in that domain. So another way to look at it, this is another thing I just thought was funny, the stages of revision. So we know that academia can be very competitive, and that there's these anonymous peer review processes that can be psychologically taxing. So I don't know if any of you've experienced this, but I have experienced where I write something and the peer reviewers say to change it, and maybe I agree with them, maybe I'm not sure, but I want to publish my work, so I just do what they say. And then later I think, oh, I'm not sure that's really what I wanted to say, or that's not what I meant. So how do we, through the process of applying for the grant, I think there's a really big challenge when it comes to how do we get grants while, I put it in a very philosophical way, while preserving our sense of our good selves, but how do we discover what really matters to us and keep on track with that while we're applying for grants? So I want to give you a few minutes again to discuss this question. This might sound like a kind of strange abstract question, but another way to put this is simply, what are the challenges when it comes to applying for a grant and the peer review process? And sharing experiences about when do you know what advice is good advice? How do you take other advice into account when it's you that's driving the car? It's not the peer reviewer who's driving a car. So even if they have good advice, you have to think about how to incorporate that advice. So I'll put you back into breakout groups again for another 10 minutes and then come back and discuss this question a little bit more because I think the biggest challenge that's obvious to me when it comes to applying for grants, the thing that makes it time consuming and stressful, I think, is the process of writing. And part of that is the process of the peer review and orienting your work towards the correct audience or audiences. And I'll give you some various kinds of tips and ways to think about this topic as well. But first, I want to give you a chance of discussing your understanding about what are the challenges when it comes to writing the grant and how can you resolve those challenges? How do you know how to improve your grant application as you're writing it over time? So I will open the rooms now for you to discuss some of these topics. Okay, so welcome back. So I think some of you are just in the middle of great discussions and you've been cut off, but we can bring the discussions into the large group now, and hear more of what you're all, what you've been thinking about, what you've been discussing. So anyone want to share what they're discussing in their group?
Yeah, maybe I could just start.
Yeah.
I don't mean to occupy the space. Universities, when I first went there, only between 2 and 4% of people went to university in England and in Hong Kong. And one of the big changes that has occurred in universities is an increase in the number of people going to university. So I'm not sure what it is in Hong Kong now, but it's probably 40% of an age group or something of that sort. With the growth of universities, then the problem has been how to finance them and how to keep research growing. And so it's not useful, I don't think, to talk about what universities did in the past, because they were very different bodies in those times. And so you've got this enormous growth of universities and of the numbers of people in universities. And organizations like UGC are just not appropriate for this new situation. The UK recognized this by cancelling the UGC in 1988. And my advice would be to change the granting system in Hong Kong as soon as possible and replace UGC with a more appropriate organization. But that's a large political statement.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, I think it is an important question to discuss. This kind of gets to the larger question too of what's the purpose of grants in the community and in the society. What other things did people discuss when it comes to the experience of applying for research grants?
Well, of course, things should have a reality in the society, and people should do their best to contribute to society. But the findings from research are often very difficult to say that these will benefit society directly. I was talking the other day in another place, another seminar about being on a program with another guy in Nanjing who got the Nobel Prize for finding subatomic parts in the atom. And he was asked to come there to give a talk on technological advances. And he said, I have absolutely no idea what these subatomic particles are doing. I just know they exist. And as to any benefit, I've no idea. But it was thought important enough that he get the Nobel Prize. That is, you can't always predict benefit from a particular research grant. It may well be tied to some local problem, but often the effects are more general.
Okay, well, let's hear from somebody else. Will,
please.
what did you discuss in your group?
In my groups, we try to share our experience of applying grants. I think one idea is that we need to be very practical. So the reviewers is always right, so that we can always accommodate the feedbacks, the comments, suggestions in the revised versions of the applications or the manuscripts. So I think this approach implies that in this process, maybe we want to think about, the authenticity of our research, the self, the self as researchers or as scholars or, good members of the universities. So as we discuss, applying grants or getting grants is also important to the university as well, so that I think we struggle a bit on these issues about how to make a balance between, this authenticity or being authentic to ourselves, and being pragmatic to getting things done.
Yeah, so being authentic versus being pragmatic. And any other thoughts anyone wants to share? Anything different than what other people have mentioned? Yeah, Wincy?
Hi, quick reaction. Our group, at the end of the day, we agree with the fact that we need to stay true and authentic to ourselves. Like back to your cartoon of the car, or after being reviewed, is a spaceship. It's impossible after a couple of years of pendulum swing of pleasing. We figure we cannot please everyone in the long run. So after a couple of experimentations, we decided maybe we need to stick with our agenda, but pragmatically is more on how to react to reviewers' comment so that we could find a balance. And part of the reason we are here is to look for the pragmatics, to really address the concerns, because some of the concerns and comments are really, in my case, one would rebut the entire paradigm of social science. And that is beyond my capacity to offer any help. So in those situations, some comments we cannot handle ourselves. So just a brief sharing, and see if my group members would want to chip in also. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other comments?
Have the competitions in our discussion. We try to share the most ridiculous comment we receive from the reviewers.
Ridiculous comments. Yes, we have to deal with them. Mark?
Can I respond to Wincy and to Will there, and just build on that? I don't want to sound arrogant here, but I think all of us would do well to identify quite quickly when we have a lousy reviewer in front of us, and just to and to say it out loud to ourselves. This person was either incompetent or lazy or not paid enough to do the job they're doing, or don't know the field, or whatever. Sometimes we have perhaps found that among 3 reviewers, reviewer 1 is perhaps the person whom the editor or the whatever found and is really good. Reviewer 2, maybe not so much. Reviewer 3, maybe even less so. And when we've had, whether this is for journal article submission or whatever for grant proposal submission, often one has to use reviewer 1 against reviewer 2 or 3 to say, look, reviewer 1 is happy with this, and I'm going to have to go that way. So I think we actually need to develop some sense of boldness and even arrogance, if you want to call it that, and say, this person doesn't know what they're doing. And that's normal. Editors have a hard time finding competent reviewers, and it's okay that you get bad reviews back. And I think we need to accept that, stop trying to please them, and use your strongest reviewer against the other ones too.
Yeah, so a lot of good points here about authenticity and dealing with reviewers. And sometimes I think we've really gone overboard with these review processes, because the whole point is to make a criticism. So even if someone thinks that was really good, I like it, they're sort of the official process is make criticism, say what's wrong, so there's this implicit assumption that the things aren't good and they need to be fixed. And I often think this is behind some of the challenges we face. Like, maybe some people can make good projects. Maybe they don't need to have 20 people tell them how to do their work. But this goes back, to a lot of the systems we have in place, which Dave Randall was mentioning, and this question of authenticity and how do we navigate this process? We can identify that there's these challenges, And I heard one person was saying they hope to have some ideas. So I can say a little bit more about this and then open back up at the end for other people's ideas, recommendations, questions. So I think one thing to consider in the first place is choosing a topic that you're really the expert on, so that you feel comfortable saying, okay, this reviewer is clearly not in the right field. And if you're working in the right field, you're able to identify and to explain what you're doing to other people. You're not going to be able to do that if that's a new topic for you. So you want to choose a topic you're interested in. And then this relates to some of the other issues that you need to decide in the first place pretty quickly. So the main issues you need to decide when you're choosing a topic is how big do you want the projects to be? So this isn't only just, this isn't disconnected from other things, okay? This is about your methodology and the kind of arguments you want to make and what you've done before, because you should think about grant projects as expanding over and again on what you've done before. So if you haven't had any quantitative work or any qualitative work in the before, you want to ease into that rather than just jump in. This is my personal experience, is the reviewers want to see that you've done similar things before. But you do want to make sure that in the end, you know what you're doing and you feel pretty solid about what you're doing. So you should have answers to these questions pretty early in your process. To me, these are the big questions, but other people can feel free to bring in others. And what do you want to produce? Who are you aiming your research for? Are you aiming it at the academic or scientific community, or for educators, or for other people? What kind of knowledge exchange looks good to you? How do you want your work to benefit society? And another thing to consider is, where do you see this work carrying your career forward? What does that mean for your next project? So I think if you have a topic that's in line with your past research, you can also see a future for that. So all of these things I think are really important to consider at the same time when you're choosing your topic. And this, I think, to me, this is one of the vital issues. If you don't have the right topic, you're in trouble. You're in that group of, okay, well, maybe my topic is kind of this, and maybe I'll add in mixed methods because my findings aren't generalizable. And all of a sudden, you have a car that you can't drive and that no reasonable person should ever try to drive, right? Making the most of the peer reviews, seeing the forest and not just the trees. So I think this is a challenge, and this is where the personal practices of focus and perseverance and commitment are important. But again, I mean, if you haven't thought through your topic, maybe you need to reconsider your topic. But once you have a strong view about what your topic is, how it's the right topic for you, how you're the best person to do the work, then you need to exercise what Mark described as that arrogance, or what someone else described as that authenticity. Okay, so ideally peer review gives you good ideas from reviewer one, but don't try to bend over backwards to please everyone, because it might not be possible. So be open-minded, but don't forget who the PI is. It's you. And a good reviewer should not be saying, do my project. A good reviewer should be giving you advice to help you do your project. Your project needs a focus, only you know what it is. So view every experience communicating about your research as a chance for you to understand that it often happens with communicating about research in a new way, that what you think you're saying sounds like something else to somebody else. So this is, to me, this is an essentially dialogical process if peer review is actually constructive. So if you think, oh, that person completely mistook me, you know, what a jerk. Well, now you know what certain kinds of people think when they read what you're writing. So this gives you an opportunity to rethink really the way that you write about it, the kinds of words you use. So for example, I do research in multicultural education. Well, that's a very controversial topic. So I simply have the second sentence of every proposal, the abstract and the proposal, the second sentence always says, or the first sentence always said, by multiculturalism, I mean how societies navigate issues of diversity. And you can have a different opinion than me, but that's what I mean, because that then tells you what if you're arguing with me or not. And this means that you shouldn't think that I'm saying something different. So hopefully you get my point. So you have to explain who you are to the reviewers, and this is an art form when it comes to applying for grants. It's an opportunity to reconsider everything, but with criticality. So I would encourage you to think about, I mentioned this issue of alignment, but it also gets to a larger issue. And maybe we should question, like, what is the relationship between doing research grants and benefiting society? Why is society funding these grants? Are they funding it for our research or for some other funding issues? What's going on here? But you can think about the process as a series of relationships when it comes to you developing yourself and you communicating with other people, right? Your participants matter, your collaborators matter. To get participants, you need to be able to speak a language that's clear to them. To get your stakeholders on board, you need to speak in a language that works for them. So this is a large group of people, and you need to be able to communicate with people about what you're doing, future collaborators, future contacts, and new scholars. So you can see it, I see it as a dialogue with you and these different groups. And you'll also learn in that process that you might put things in a different way when you're teaching undergraduates versus when you're giving a research seminar, versus when you're having a breakout room here, versus when you are discussing this with a friend who's not in the university or something like that. So I encourage you to think about it as a dialogical encounter and sort of an evolving thinking. Your thinking will evolve over time, and with that, your ability to communicate effectively to the diverse groups of people that you need to communicate with. The most practical tips I can give, because people come from different fields here, and I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but this is what I have as far as practical tips go. So project feasibility is essential, and this relates to who you are. So you should think of a project when you're identifying your topic and your project. You should think about how you are the best person to do this research rather than anybody else. That might sound daunting for those of you who are still students. But another way to think about this is it should connect to your past research and expands that. Do not set out to do something totally new. As we discussed before, this is one of the challenges of grant writing, is we don't have freedom to kind of say, well, I've always been interested in this topic, so my next grant will look at this topic. That's not really going to be as productive as looking at who you are, because the reviewer and the reader also think about who you are when they evaluate the grants, and they think about, are you a good person to do this research? So it simply helps them out if you are identifiable in the research product. At the same time, think about your audience and how to write to them. So as I mentioned before, this is something we exercise over time, being able to speak from your heart, but learn what matters to others. So maybe you really want to illuminate something new, show understanding, argue for best practice, point out a problem with what people are doing, learn how to communicate in a way that is effective to the different groups of people you need to be able to communicate with. So you need to negotiate. Another way to think about this is there's a balance between being flexible and having your integrity. And being a bit Aristotelian at the moment, I think that I can't tell you where that line is, right? Sometimes I get very influenced by other people's views. Other times I think, no, this is the right way for me. So I think you should consciously reflect about that when you get peer review feedback and when you decide what you want to do, and think about what other people will respond to. Anticipate your reviewers, who they are and what they need. So this is probably the most practical tip I can give you. Think about all of the people think of all of the people in your field remotely relevant to your project. This might sound a bit cynical to some people, but think about who those people are and explain all of their work in your project, and don't say anything very mean about any of their work. Just say, I'm expanding. So, Mark Mason did the best work on this topic, But he hasn't focused on what happened last year. So this is where I'm actually just going to extend the discussion, okay? Because some reviewers, sometimes when you get a bad reviewer, it's because some people are a little sensitive and they get their feelings hurt. And they remember having that terrible reviewer 3 several times, and they woke up this morning and they didn't get coffee, and then they just write you a nasty review. So the best way to avoid that is say how wonderful all the researchers are in your field. Don't leave any of them out. Highlight the ones that you really like, because that way they could become the reviewers too. So this is a way that you can kind of encourage reviewers to be identified, but make sure that you don't say anything too critical. I had it happen once, and I talked to people, everyone knows who it is. They were so angry, and I didn't think that I was saying anything critical about their work. I was just talking about a different aspect of a situation, but they came out all guns blazing saying, well, if Liz had bothered to read any of this work, then she would know this. And actually, I think that the RGC, I think that the main group in Hong Kong actually dismissed the review, and they got a 4th and 5th reviewer because they could tell it was really over the top and negative. But these are ways you can deal with your reviewers. Don't let templates dictate your future. So read other people's grants to see how they do it, but there's not going to be a perfect way. You know, you can't just copy and paste, right? Your problem is different. Who you are is different. So templates can help you, but they can't tell you what to do. And practice talking about the project and your agenda with everyone. Like I said before, they don't, and like Mark mentioned, they don't know who to identify to review your work. So it's going to be some people in some different fields. So practice talking about what you're doing with people in different fields, and you'll see how some groups are going to be easy to misunderstand what you're saying compared to others. Other people are going to like it or have a question. What do you mean by multiculturalism? What do you mean about shadow education? Something like that. So those are some of the tips that I have. I realize we're pretty much out of time now. Unfortunately, I went a bit of, it's just 2:30 now, but if there's any other questions or comments, maybe we can take a few more minutes. So any questions, or do people have other tips that they want to give? Those of you who are experienced with writing grants.
Be confident.
Be confident. How can we be confident?
Just don't apply for a grant if you don't really think it's a useful thing to do. If you apply for a grant, make sure you know about what you're applying for, and then think that you're also the person that knows about it. And so you needn't kowtow to anybody, in my view. Be confident about what you're doing.
Great, that's excellent advice. Any other thoughts or interesting ideas people have to share?
Liz, I said in my small group something about writing carefully, writing for the reader, for the reviewer. But I'm going to pick that up in a subsequent seminar, as I've mentioned. So I won't say more here now. Yeah.
Oh, and that gives us a good thing to say. I don't think we've confirmed the date for you, have we yet, Mark? So we haven't confirmed a date. Our next seminar will be probably next month or two, and Mark will give it, hopefully kind of extending this discussion. Any other final thoughts? Will or Tina, can I invite you to give any final, something you've learned or something, other tips you want to share?
Well, thank you very much for the presentation of this. I think we have a very engaging seminar today, which is enormous to what I have attended at the universities. So I think we have learned, you know, how on the one hand we want to practically respond to these all kinds of expectations or managerial needs applied in our sectors. On the other hand, we want to stay true to ourselves as researchers, as scholars. And so thank you very much for your contributions today. All your discussions, all your sharing is much appreciated. So Look forward to meet you again in our next IE seminar. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to see
Bye.
everyone. Thanks for your feedback.